It's day 2 of pre-season testing in Spain, where teams will be hoping for a better performance from their new cars. Let's go to Jerez now. Craig Slater waiting to speak to us. Craig, good morning to you. Just 6 drivers managed to record lap times yesterday. Can we expect more today?
Well, we'll hope so. Yes, only 93 laps completed by the entire field yesterday compared to 637 on day 1 of the Jerez test last year. The teams are easing their way in a gingerly fashion into this new V6 turbo era. Sky Sports F1's Ted Kravitz is here. I think it was more or less what we expected. But you do ask yourself the question, if the teams are saying, well, we're more ready today than yesterday, so why didn't they just start these projects a day earlier?
I suppose you always use the time that you have to do things, don't you? And that certainly applies to the Formula One teams. But yes, it was slightly embarrassing yesterday that nobody was out, and certainly if you'd paid your €10 to come and sit in the grandstands and watch some Formula One testing, you would have felt hard done by. But anyway, it's a new day. We have a wet track, damp track. It's been raining quite heavily overnight, and so it looks like we're going to get some wet tyre running, which is also very important because after this test we're off to Bahrain. It doesn't often rain in the desert. It does sometimes, but not very often. So it could have been, if we hadn't had this wet day today, and who knows what will happen tomorrow or the next day, but that we'd get to the first race in Australia, or maybe the second race in Malaysia when it pretty much rains at 4 o'clock every afternoon, never having tested these new cars on the new wet tyres. So it's very important, actually, that we've got this wet day.
We understand Pirelli, who'd originally planned, if there were no rain, to flood the track on Friday. They're talking about still perhaps adding to what dampness we have by sprinkling some water on it again. It'd be quite a curious scene, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you've got to keep it wet. That's the problem, is that these wet tyres, they disperse a whole bathtub full of water per lap. They throw up about sort of 63 litres per 200 metres, I think the statistic is, but something very impressive. So once you get a lot of cars going around, it does dry the track out quite quickly, so they need to keep it artificially wet. So that's one of the very Formula One things that they'll be doing today.
We had one particular incident yesterday which Lewis Hamilton had his crash into the barriers at turn 1, emerged from it unscathed. I understand Mercedes cannot guarantee they'll be out first thing this morning because they're still investigating the exact cause of the issue. I know you have some understanding as to what exactly is at fault. But up until that point, had they looked the most impressive outfit yesterday?
Oh, very much so. I mean, yesterday was Mercedes' day up until the point that their front wing failed and Lewis Hamilton went off in a blaze of tyre smoke into the crash barrier. So, yeah, it was all going reliably up until the point when their front wing broke. So it's a strange failure, a failure that shouldn't happen to a team like Mercedes. They've got whole rooms full of people whose job it is to make sure that the stresses and loads on the car's wings are enough for the tolerances to which they've been made. So a strange mistake, and their team boss Paddy Lowe, technical team boss, said yesterday that we're confused as to why this happened. This shouldn't happen to a big team like us. So they understand that the failure was somewhere in the pillar supports that go from the nose cone onto the main plane of the front wing. They know exactly where it was. They're not telling us exactly where it was. So, and they're also confident that they can put a fix in place to make sure that the spare nose cone they have here is able to be run. Now, that fix might not be very pretty. It's probably not going to be a beautifully bonded piece of carbon fiber because there's only so much they can do in the field here. And they would have been working overnight in their factory in the UK to get a fix going. And that might just be a steel plate or maybe some bolts, as simple as that, either side, just to make sure that they can run reliably without the wing falling off. And those fixes would have been done either in the factory, or if they could do it, they could do it here, and then flown out either on a first flight this morning or last flight last night. You've got several airports around here, Seville, Malaga, you know, it's pretty well served. They could even hire a private plane if they had got the money to fly it out. So I think they're confident of getting the fix done and delivered to the car. As you say, might not be ready first thing, but they will be out today.
Nico Rosberg will be keeping a close eye on that. He replaces Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes today. At least they did get some running yesterday. McLaren got 0 running. They, though, hope to have fixed their electrical fault yesterday evening, so Jenson Button should be out first thing this morning.
Craig, thank you very much. We'll be back with you for much more, of course. You can see every...
It's the second day of testing for the F1 teams and their new cars in Spain after an incident-packed opening day. Lewis Hamilton crashed, Kimi Raikkonen was fastest for Ferrari and McLaren didn't test at all. Well, today it's been raining, so what do we have in store? Craig Slater joins us live from the track in Jerez. Morning to you, Craig. The rain means there's been a change to the testing schedule. What can you tell us?
That's right. Pirelli, who are the official tyre supplier to Formula One, had nominated Friday as a day for wet running. They were going to run their wet and intermediate tyres then. They told us they would actually water the track if there wasn't any rain on Friday. But they brought that forward to today because rain is forecast. We expect better weather on Friday. But they have not just been counting on the rain itself, they've been augmenting the dampness on the track. They've sent this truck around to water the track. I've never seen this before at any circuit. During a testing period or an in-season testing period, but yeah, quite interesting. They're laying down a film of water there, and the cars are already going out on the intermediate tyres this morning, so they will get some data on them. Important this because the next two tests are in Bahrain. Doesn't often rain in the desert, and of course very early in the Formula One season we have the Malaysian Grand Prix when it can rain very heavily. These are new tyre compounds, so Pirelli need to gather data, so they're doing that today. But it will be a little bit of a headache for the teams who aren't here running their cars yet, which are Lotus and Marussia, who only expect to come here on Thursday, so they'll lack that tyre data. But an important element to pre-season testing this, they will get a chance, the teams, to gather some data on these intermediate tyres. And you know, it isn't so much about setup at the moment anyway, so it doesn't really harm their programmes. They're doing mechanical checks largely on the tyres at this point, so the fact that they're on intermediate tyres won't make a great deal of difference.
Now, we've heard the new engine sound. It's a little bit different. What do the drivers make of it?
This is an interesting subject. This it has created a little bit of a talking point around the paddock. The sound of the new V6 engines. A number of drivers have been canvassed on it. Sebastian Vettel, the world champion, admitted he's not quite won over to it yet. He preferred the V8s. He'd rather Formula One had gone the other way and gone to a 10-cylinder engine, a bit more macho sound. He would have preferred. Nico Hülkenberg compared the V6 to DTM, the touring car championship. Nico Rosberg, however, said he did quite like it. It reminded him of watching old videos of his father, Keke Rosberg. And Toto Wolff said we really have to reserve judgment until we hear a number of cars on the track at once. McLaren have just been out in the last minute or so. They were the first car on track this morning. Jenson Button at the wheel of that. And he gave some quite interesting comments to us last week, talking about how it's going to be important for the drivers to adjust to the sound of the engine in terms of how they actually read the car's performance. The subtlety of the gear change is often about the driver tuning into the noise of the engine. So acclimatizing to that is going to be an important thing for the drivers to do as they fully master and get into properly in tune with the car itself, because there are more gear shifts this year. The response of the car to the gear changes is much more immediate because there is an increase in torque. So all those little fine points of detecting the vibrations and the sound of the engine are going to be essential. But yeah, McLaren will be relieved to get Button out on the track today, having had absolutely no running because of an electrical problem yesterday.
Yes, interesting thoughts there, Craig. Thank you very much for now. Well, you can... It's a new era for Formula One, and day two of testing for the teams and their new cars is underway in Jerez in Spain. But will we see the drama of yesterday when Lewis Hamilton crashed his new Mercedes? Well, overnight rain has left the track damp, so tyre suppliers Pirelli have brought forward Friday's wet testing to today, but the track isn't quite wet enough, so they've watered. Well, plenty of interest outside the team's garages as the new McLaren car hit the track for the first time in public this year. Jenson Button was among the early testers this morning. No sign, though, of Eric Boullier, who's expected to be named the team's new principal after leaving Lotus last week. Mercedes chairman Niki Lauda was trackside, no doubt hoping there won't be a repeat of yesterday's front wing failure on Lewis Hamilton's car.
Right, let's bring you some news from the Formula One world. Plenty of breaking stories around, and the former Lotus team principal Eric Boullier has been appointed racing director of McLaren. This story coming after he resigned from Lotus last Friday morning. Had a real great success with Lotus on a shoestring budget, really. In fact, doing better than McLaren last season. So he moves to McLaren, and this coming after Martin Whitmarsh, who'd been 5 years as team principal at McLaren, was left his position. Failed to win a single podium place last season. It was their worst team performance since 1980. Let's go to Jerez, shall we, where testing is taking place ahead of the new Formula One season, and we can get more on this from Craig Slater. Craig, what can you tell us about this appointment?
Well, it's an interesting one. We had been forecasting last week that Martin Whitmarsh would lose his job as team principal at McLaren because he'd played no part in the recent activities at the team. He wasn't at the launch. His name didn't appear on any of the news releases concerning their plans for this season at all. He isn't going to be here this week. However, interestingly, in this statement, which announces Eric Boulier's appointment as racing director, this a new position created within the team. There isn't any mention of what's happening with regard to Martin Whitmarsh, but Boullier, rather than replacing Whitmarsh as team principal, is taking a position in a command structure in McLaren, if we can put it that way. So Ron Dennis, as Chief Executive Officer of the racing group, will be at the top of that. Now, beneath him, there's going to be another position created, a CEO of the racing team itself, to whom Eric Boullier will report. So it seems as though Eric Boullier has been brought in to run the day-to-day aspects of the team. So he would be in charge at the track here, and will be probably at most races during the course of the season. He's very much a hands-on kind of individual, experienced in aerodynamics in particular, so you'll have a handle on car design and that kind of thing as well. But there will be an extra role created between Dennis and Boullier. So it is a significant development for McLaren. It was going to be my question to Jenson Button today. Are the team suffering from a lack of direction at the moment because they don't have a hands-on leader in place? And, you know, was that a contributory factor to the fact that they weren't able to get any running yesterday? So it is interesting what's happened today. McLaren's management structure is now taking shape, but significantly Boullier not being appointed team principal but being racing director in a rather unusual kind of command structure which Ron Dennis is instituting here. We don't expect Eric Boullier to be at the track today, but it may be that he will make his arrival over the final 2 days of testing. But yeah, Boullier has released some comments on his appointment. He says, I've already personally conveyed to the entire workforce at the McLaren Group, which includes McLaren Racing, the values, principles and mindset that I intend to adopt going forward. My intention is from now on that everyone at McLaren Racing will understand their responsibilities and accountabilities, focusing on the specific areas of expertise and keeping with those principles and mindset. And Ron Dennis goes on to say, in due course, we will announce the identity of McLaren Racing's new Chief Executive Officer, who will report to me and to whom Eric will report. So some clarity as to the way forward for McLaren this season. Eric Boullier, having left Lotus, will now be effective day-to-day control of the team, but still someone to be appointed above him to liaise with Ron Dennis, the group chairman.
Craig, thank you very much. That's a new era for Formula One, and day 2 of testing for the teams and their new cars is underway in Jerez in Spain. But will we see the drama of yesterday when Lewis Hamilton crashed his new Mercedes? Overnight rain has left the track damp, so tyre suppliers Pirelli have brought forward Friday's wet testing to today. But the track isn't quite wet enough, so the track has been watered. Plenty of interest outside the team garages as the new McLaren car hit the track for the first time in public this year. Jenson Button among the early testers this morning. No sign, though, of Eric Boullier, who's been appointed as McLaren's new racing director after leaving Lotus.
Let's get more then on our developing story out in Jerez that Eric Boullier has been given the new role of racing director at McLaren in an organisational shake-up. We can go live now to our reporter Craig Slater, who's in Jerez for us. Craig, what can you tell us about this appointment?
Well, we forecast last week that Eric Boullier would in actual fact become McLaren team principal, replacing Martin Whitmarsh, but Ron Dennis in his statement today has outlined a rather more complicated command structure which Boullier fits into. He's to be racing director, he's to report to a chief executive officer of the race team, that position going to be temporarily held by Jonathan Neal, who's the managing director at McLaren, and he in turn will report to Ron Dennis as CEO of the group itself. So a rather unconventional structure in traditional Formula One terms, I suppose. So it's, if you were to put it in football terminology, I suppose you have a chairman shareholder in the shape of Dennis, then maybe a kind of technical director, which Jonathan Neal is holding that post, and I suppose you could cast Eric Boullier as a kind of first team coach. So it's a tripartite structure McLaren are adopting, and no word from them on the situation with regard to Martin Whitmarsh, who was their team principal. No mention of any position for him in this rejigged management structure at McLaren, but it's clear that the team want to keep whatever happens with him separate from the appointments they're making at the moment. So yeah, a new management structure for McLaren, a bit different from the old traditional management structures at teams like Williams. You still know Frank is in charge here, but Pat Simmons is the chief technical officer, and we're maybe going to get involved in discussing what's going on the track. A lot more running today than yesterday. Couldn't the teams have all started their projects a day earlier?
Well, actually, I wish we'd started a week earlier. But yeah, it was strange yesterday, wasn't it? It sort of almost seemed coincidental that everyone seemed to be struggling to get the cars out. I mean, these are very complex cars, much more complex than the devices we've been racing for the last few years. And I guess, you know, those final details that we think, yeah, OK, we can smooth that out in the last few hours, took a lot longer than we expected.
Was it also perhaps a case of, I don't know, you could have run more laps, but it's assessing the data lap by lap as well and making fine adjustments between the runs? Is that significant at this stage?
No, not really. It's about making sure that all the systems are working. So we're not really into the fine-tuning. And to be honest, we won't really be into that till we get to Bahrain. So everyone's got what they call their launch car here. So, you know, it's not got all the tweaks on that we'll have by the time we get to Australia for the first race. But what we need something that will run, that will allow us to understand the new powertrains, to tune our new gearboxes, all this sort of stuff. And yes, of course, we get some fundamental performance information, but we'll start pushing more, maybe a little bit at the end of this week, but much more as we get to Bahrain for the second and third tests.
How much of a headache would it have been if you weren't getting the mileage at this point? And is there any advantage at all in coming to the party a little bit late, as it were, and maybe learning from others' mistakes? Can you do that?
No, absolutely not. I don't think that's a good thing to do, and of course, you know, I don't think Lotus have done it out of choice. I think the whole pit lane has some sympathy for their situation, and indeed Marussia, who we believe are going to get here later this week. Even, you know, with stable regulations and relatively simple engines as we had last year, I still think that the balance was that you got out and you did your running. Now, as I said, it's not necessarily with the car you're going to race, and you're trying to bring your upgrades along in parallel. But this year, with these really quite complex power units that we're using, absolutely we want to be out there, we want to be learning. There are lots of things surprising us as we go along, in spite of all our sort of homework we've done before coming here. So, yeah, we want to be out there.
Just briefly and finally, Pat, I mean, the noses have been a big talking point, and you mentioned Lotus. They have this twin tusk. They were insisting yesterday it's quite legal. Are you convinced of that? And what have you seen? What have you made of the other cars you've seen in that particular area? Anything? Are you still thinking you might change what you have on the front of your car?
Well, I think, you know, engineering rhinoplasty could be the subject of the year, couldn't it? As far as Lotus goes, yes, I think it's legal. Of course, you know, Lotus have been hemorrhaging employees from all departments over the last few months, so I think all the teams sort of had a little bit of an idea of where they were going, so it wasn't a big surprise to us. There are some different interpretations. Will they really make that much difference in the end? I'm not sure, but certainly, you know, we absolutely haven't finished work on the whole of the front end of the car. We will be looking for months to come at lots of fundamentals and perhaps more a lot of nuances of the fundamentals that we eventually decide the direction we want to go in.
Thank you very much, Pat. Yes, a good solid day for you today, and as Pat says, there's no substitute, I think, for the teams putting in the hard yards at this point, and the likes of Lotus and Marussia, who haven't taken part yet, will have to go through all these grueling systems checks before they can work on the finer details of their 2014 models.
Thanks very much, Craig.
Big Formula One news. McLaren have appointed Eric Boullier as their team's racing director. Boullier resigned as team principal of Lotus on Friday in order to take up the newly created role with McLaren. Frenchman's appointment is part of a new management structure at the team under chairman Ron Dennis. Well, Boullier was made team principal of Renault in January 2010, despite never working in F1 before. The Renault F1 team recovered under Boullier. After an 8th place finish the previous season, Renault secured consecutive 5th place finishes in 2010 and 2011. And after Renault was renamed Lotus F1, the team's recovery continued. Consecutive 4th place finishes were secured in 2012 and last season. Boullier joins a McLaren team desperate for results after last season when they failed to get on the podium in any race for the first time since 1980. This morning they've been busy testing their new car, the MP429 in Jerez. Jenson Button was at the wheel. He was retained by the team for 2014 and is joined by new rookie teammate Kevin Magnussen.
Now, the big Formula One news then. McLaren have appointed Eric Boullier as the team's racing director. He resigned as team principal of Lotus on Friday in order to take up the newly created role with McLaren. The Frenchman's appointment is part of a new management structure at the team under chairman Ron Dennis. Well, let's head live to Jerez now and join Craig Slater. Craig.
Thank you very much. More on that McLaren story in just a moment. But we have had a development on the track here. The world champion Sebastian Vettel has left the building. His running is over for the day. A technical issue with the Renault engine and his Red Bull car has meant they've decided it's pointless for them to try and continue to have any track time today. So he has flown home, presumably Ted Kravitz, to spend a little bit more time with his new baby daughter. But how significant is that? How significant a blow is that to Vettel and Red Bull?
I think it is a blow because Vettel chose to do the first day of running when he only managed, what was it, 3 laps, and today's running, after which was curtailed by what we understand is a battery problem with his new Renault engine and its hybrid energy recovery systems. So his test is over. Vettel's test is over. The next time Sebastian Vettel will be on track is when all of the Formula One circus ups and flies to Bahrain in the middle of February. So he's going to want to put some pressure. He's going to be putting some pressure on his Red Bull team to try and get the car reliable. And by extension, Red Bull are then going to be putting pressure on their engine suppliers, Renault, to get the battery and the control unit reliable for the next test in Bahrain. Because if it's overheating now in southern Spain when it's warm but still jacket weather, heaven only knows what's going to happen to it when we get to Bahrain. So the only people indeed are running at the moment are all the Mercedes and Ferrari powered cars. I think this points to a larger problem that Renault have got at the moment with their battery and with the control system that operates it. It's all getting a bit too hot. Now that we're actually stepped up the pace and the cars are doing some proper lap times, it's all overheating a bit for the Renault teams.
Because the Mercedes engine cars and the Ferrari engine cars have put together in excess of 60 laps, barely 20 for the Renault engine cars. However, this overheating issue isn't solely confined to Renault, because we've seen the Force India piloted by Sergio Perez today providing some dramatic images for us. So, you know, across the board, there are problems with these power units.
Yeah, the Force India mechanics very quick on the fire extinguishers to extinguish what looked like a smoke situation rather than a fire. I don't think we've seen any fires yet. I say yet because even Adrian Newey, Red Bull technical boss, was saying yesterday that these batteries can overheat, and he called it they can suffer thermal runaway, which is just ordinary speak for overheating overheating until it catches fire. And he said if that does happen, the safest thing to do is take the battery out, 20 kilos worth of lithium-ion battery, stick it in the pit lane and watch it burn. That's what he said that will happen if these batteries do overheat. So yeah, that's why we've seen people at Force India, the mechanics, very quickly on the fire extinguishers just to get any sort of overheating under control.
Okay, so indistinct progress from a number of the teams. Perhaps also a little bit indistinct at the Ferrari management structure, although we've learned today that Eric Boullier is to become racing director. Is that Ron speak? By that I mean Ron Dennis speak for team principal or not?
This is a new management at McLaren that we're talking about. Ron Dennis, of course, always been the top dog at McLaren, and he's taken control. Martin Whitmarsh out. He is to decide now whether he's going to stay with another job at McLaren, probably not, or whether to go and try something else somewhere else with another team, or perhaps out of Formula One. In comes the old Lotus boss, Eric Boullier. I must say, a strange choice for many. Not exactly a born and died grey McLaren person, but yeah, he's got a big job ahead of him, learning who's who in the team.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Ted. Yeah, we'll keep our eye on that situation. But it is worth noting as well today that it is 1 month since Michael Schumacher had his accident, his terrible skiing accident, which has kept him in a coma in the University Hospital in Grenoble in France. And tributes outside the Ferrari garage, a message of support on their pit board, and also on the Mercedes car of Nico Rosberg as well. And of course, everyone very concerned about his ongoing situation, and everyone within the paddock here wishing him all the best as he continues to try to make a recovery from that terrible accident.
Yeah, thank you very much, Craig. Red Bull struggles have continued into the second day of Formula One's pre-season testing in Jerez. They were forced to cut their day short after completing just 8 laps of the track because of a battery problem. Team principal Christian Horner, technical director Adrian Newey and driver Daniel Ricciardo watched on intently during the afternoon. Sebastian Vettel was at the wheel, but was called into the pits just before 2 p.m. to allow the team to work on the car ahead of day 3. More problems at Force India 2. For the second day running, Sergio Perez needed his car retrieving from the recovery truck. Marshals needed to use fire extinguishers after smoke started bellowing from the car. McLaren's Jenson Button was fastest in today's morning session. No doubt that caught the attention of new rookie teammate Kevin Magnussen, who was trackside. And up and down the grid, teams have been showing support for Michael Schumacher, who remains in hospital following a skiing accident. Mercedes cars carrying a good luck message for the 7-time world champion. Well, Schumacher's manager has dismissed speculation reports in France that he's gradually being awoken from his coma. It's exactly 1 month since his accident, and fellow countryman Sebastian Vettel is praying he makes a full recovery.
It's horrible for, especially I think for his family and close friends, not knowing what's going to happen. So, in that regard, you know, as I said, I think I'm still as shocked as everybody else, and obviously pray for, you know, and hope that he will just come back and the miracle will happen and he will be the person he has always been before.
Now to one of the most popular events on the...
Now, the second day of Formula One's pre-season test in Jerez is over. It's been another frustrating day for Red Bull. They completed just 8 laps before suffering a battery problem. McLaren's Jenson Button ended the day the quickest.
Well, Jenson, you had, I suppose, some catching up to do today. How good a job did you make of it?
Yeah, I think you always want to do more laps. This is really our first day of actual testing, of actual running. Anyway, yesterday was a no-show, really. I think that we're getting a good understanding of things in terms of the car, the way that the engine is behaving, the turbo. Obviously, it's very different to what we're used to. There's a lot of work needed, but it's all stuff that we can work on now. I mean, there's nothing that scares me with the car. There's a lot in terms of setup that we can do. It just takes time. And in terms of the way that the engine behaves as well. Under braking, traction, those are areas that I think we're all going to have to work a lot in. But it's exciting because there's a lot we can play with, a lot we can adjust. The brake system is very complicated. So getting it right is tough, and today we've had a few moments where it's not worked quite right and you end up locking up and almost finding the gravel. So it's tricky, but it's enjoyable to drive, you know. I have to be honest, it doesn't sound like anything I've driven before in terms of an F1 car. I love the roar of a V10 and a V8, but this is what we have, and I think as long as we have good racing, the fans will still love it, and I think that you're going to see some great racing this year.
So Button fastest and Red Bull team principal Christian Horner, technical director Adrian Newey and Daniel Ricciardo watched on intently during the afternoon. Sebastian Vettel was at the wheel but was called into the pits just before 2 o'clock this afternoon to allow the team to prepare tomorrow's setup. More problems, though, at Force India. For the second day running, Sergio Perez's car needed retrieving by the recovery truck. Well, the red flags were waved again when Marcus Ericsson's Caterham stopped mid-lap. But as we know, McLaren's Jenson Button ended the day quickest of all the drivers. And no doubt that caught the attention of new teammate Kevin Magnussen. Valtteri Bottas topped the timesheets at one stage of the afternoon. And his new teammate Felipe Massa was trackside and will be encouraged by Williams' early performance. Well, outside the Ferrari garage, the team showed their support for former driver Michael Schumacher, who remains in hospital following a skiing accident. And so too did Mercedes. This message adorned the side of Nico Rosberg's car.
It's really a message from us as a team, you know, to show that we're thinking about him, and not only him, but his family and friends, and that we wish him to, you know, a good recovery, and all the best, of course.
McLaren have appointed Eric Boullier as their new racing director, raising serious doubts about the future of team principal Martin Whitmarsh. Boullier, who left Lotus last week, is part of a new management structure brought in by Chairman Ron Dennis. Boullier will run the team and report to a chief executive officer, who will then report to Dennis. No mention was made of Whitmarsh.
He's obviously had a good time the last few years of his racing career in Formula One. He seems like a good character. I don't really know Eric that well. And I think he seems, from what I've read, very excited about the challenge, because it is, you know, always a challenge. Formula One, you're racing against the best guys in the world, and you need to build the right foundations to go racing and to try and win.
Just briefly, is it a straightforward management structure? Is it clear who's leading the team, you know, with the 3 people, it seems, in charge?
It will be. I don't think... well, obviously, there are more people that will be, or a person that will be joining the team. But no, it's not settled yet. And I think there'll be a much better understanding of the management and the direction the team will be going in, which I think is very interesting.
This is a new management at McLaren that we're talking about. Ron Dennis, of course, always been the top dog at McLaren, and he's taken control. Martin Whitmarsh out. He is to decide now whether he's going to stay with another job at McLaren, probably not, or whether to go and try something else somewhere else with another team, or perhaps out of Formula One. In comes the old Lotus boss, Eric Boullier. I must say, a strange choice for many. Not exactly a born and died grey McLaren person, but yeah, he's got a big job ahead of him, learning who's who in the team.
Now, the second day of testing has finished in Jerez ahead of the new Formula One season. Let's head live there now and join Craig Slater. Craig, again, it hasn't gone to plan for all of the teams. Who struggled?
Sebastian Vettel, the world champion in particular, only 8 laps for him on the track today. Add that to the 3 laps he had yesterday, 11 laps in total, and that'll be his total running in Jerez. He's already flown out, having cancelled his media engagements today. The problem was with the energy recovery system on his hybrid engine. That kept his car in the garage, and Red Bull called a halt to proceedings. It's been a real issue with the Renault-powered cars since they've come to testing here this week. Only 19 laps completed by Renault-powered cars here today, compared to the 212 laps that Mercedes-powered cars have undertaken. An average of 50 per car for the Mercedes-powered cars, only 9 per car for the Renault-powered cars. There were some issues for one of the Mercedes-powered teams, Force India, Sergio Perez. His car overheated just approaching turn 1. Some dramatic images there, but that was a minor blip in a decent day's running for them. So generally speaking, if your car has a Ferrari engine or a Mercedes engine, you're looking pretty good today, but it's a real headache if you're powered by Renault, and that includes Red Bull and the world champion.
OK, well, what about McLaren? It was a tough season for them last year. Are there any early signs that they can be optimistic about this season?
Well, they had catching up to do today because Jenson Button didn't make it onto the track at all yesterday. There was an electrical fault with the car. They sorted that out last night. Button was the first onto the track this morning, and yes, he looked pretty good. He topped the timesheets. That doesn't mean very much at this stage. However, the car did look good. It looked well balanced, and his suspension system drew a lot of positive comments. Quite an innovative system. The cars have lost downforce this year because they've moved the beam wing away at the rear end of the car, and obviously they don't have the blown effect from the exhaust either. So this suspension system adds downforce going round corners, and it also makes the car go quicker in a straight line. So it's an innovative little gizmo. It's good to see McLaren coming up with that kind of thing early in the season. And Button, after today, pronounced himself pretty satisfied with the way things had gone.
It's enjoyable to drive, you know. I have to be honest, it doesn't sound like anything I've driven before in terms of an F1 car. I love the roar of a V10 and a V8, but this is what we have, and I think as long as we have good racing, the fans will still love it, and I think that you're going to see some great racing this year.
Jenson Button carrying a message, R.I.P. Papa, on his helmet today. He lost his father just a couple of weeks ago. It's not something we've been talking to him about particularly, but he obviously has felt the loss very keenly. And there are lots of poignant messages around the track here in Jerez today, because it is exactly 1 month to the day since Michael Schumacher's skiing accident. He remains in an induced coma in a hospital in Grenoble. His management stressing that despite reports in the French press that he was being brought out the coma, they were saying that any kind of information about the state of his health that hasn't come from the hospital or hasn't come from his management is pure speculation. But Ferrari and Mercedes carrying messages of support for Michael Schumacher, and those sentiments echoed throughout the paddock here in Jerez.
OK, thank you, Craig.
Now, McLaren have appointed Eric Boullier as their new racing director, raising serious doubts about the future of team principal Martin Whitmarsh. Well, the news was announced on day 2 of pre-season testing in Jerez. McLaren were the first cars out on track this morning. It was a wet track that was artificially watered. Pirelli decided to use today as their one official day for testing their new wet weather tyres. And Jenson Button seemed to get on well in those conditions. He set the fastest time in the morning, he set the fastest time of the day as the track dried out as well this afternoon. So Button was quickest, 6/10 quicker than Kimi Raikkonen's Ferrari. Valtteri Bottas was third for Williams, while Nico Rosberg was fourth after completing 97 laps, which was more laps than anybody else. But it was a bad day for Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel. He only managed 8 laps. And you can see the roundup of day 2 of testing. That's on the Formula 1 channel tonight at 9 o'clock. Well, Ted Kravitz's notebook follows that at 9:15.
Jenson Button went fastest in testing on the day that his team announced Eric Boullier's arrival as racing director. Button finished 6/10 quicker than Kimi Raikkonen's Ferrari. Valtteri Bottas was third for Williams, while Nico Rosberg was fourth after completing 97 laps, which was more laps than anyone else. But it was a bad day for Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel. He only managed 8 laps.
Finally, a chance to test the MP429, and Jenson Button promptly topped the timesheets. But McLaren were making headlines off the track too. Eric Boullier, the former Lotus team principal, was appointed racing director under CEO Ron Dennis, which seems to leave no place for former team principal Martin Whitmarsh. The management restructuring follows McLaren's worst season in Formula One since 1980.
He's obviously had a good time the last few years of his racing career in Formula One. He seems like a good character. I don't really know Eric that well. And I think he seems, from what I've read, very excited about the challenge, because it is, always a challenge.
On track, the Mercedes-powered car completed 43 laps overall, having not completed a single one on the first day. And Button feels they have a solid platform.
It's tricky, but it's enjoyable to drive. I have to be honest, it doesn't sound like anything I've driven before in terms of an F1 car. I love the roar of a V10 and a V8, but this is what we have, and I think as long as we have good racing, the fans will still love it, and I think that you're going to see some great racing this year.
Mercedes worked through the night to fix the broken W05 following Lewis Hamilton's crash. And on day 2, Nico Rosberg enjoyed almost a full day's running, completing the most laps of any team.
The car feels okay, it doesn't feel too different. It's heavier, yeah, so it feels like last year in the race with a lot of fuel. Of course there's less downforce, and the engine is a bit different, yeah, that you have higher gears, so in the hairpin you're going to be using third gear instead of first gear sometimes like last year, so all those things are a bit different.
Following just 3 laps on day 1, Red Bull struggled again. Sebastian Vettel was back behind the wheel of the RB10, but managed only 8 laps before the team were forced to stop running due to a battery problem. Toro Rosso didn't run at all, meaning Renault-powered cars managed just 19 laps on day 2. Meanwhile, Kimi Raikkonen was kept busy as the Ferrari continued to prove its early reliability. At this early stage of pre-season testing, track time is the key commodity. Mercedes and Ferrari engine cars are getting it. Renault engine ones simply aren't, and that's a major headache for the current world champion. Craig Slater, Sky Sports, Jerez.
Jensen. Talking of which, the world champion Sebastian Vettel won't take any further part in the remaining 2 days of testing. This after another day of reliability issues. Sky Sports F1 Ted Kravitz believes Red Bull have their work cut out to get things right for the next test session in Bahrain next month.
It is a blow because Vettel chose to do the first day of running when he only managed, 3 laps, and today's running, after which was curtailed by what we understand is a battery problem with his new Renault engine and its hybrid energy recovery systems. So his test is over. Vettel's test is over. The next time for Sebastian Vettel will be on track is when all of the Formula One circus ups and flies to Bahrain in the middle of February. So he's going to want to put some pressure. He's going to be putting some pressure on his Red Bull team to try and get the car reliable. And by extension, Red Bull are then going to be putting pressure on their engine suppliers, Renault, to get the battery and the control unit reliable for the next test in Bahrain. Because if it's overheating now in southern Spain when it's warm but still jacket weather, heaven only knows what's going to happen to it when we get to Bahrain.
Well, despite their struggles, Alain Prost is still backing Red Bull and Vettel to win the World Championship. The 4-time champion also thinks it'll be hard for these smaller teams to cope with the big changes in regulations.
I don't think a small team can compete with the big teams today with this new technology. Even if the engine is going to be the same, but it's a very complex car, complex integration of the engine in the car. So it's going to be between the top teams. I'm still very positive with Red Bull and Renault to get the best package, but you could have some surprises.
Okay, so make a prediction here and now. Who's going to win the title this season? Come on.
I think I would say again another time Sebastian.
Really?
Because if you look at the package plus Sebastian being involved so well and so much inside the team, being very curious on the development, and it's also a new challenge for him after the 4 titles. Winning again, with the new technology is going to be a big motivation.
Well, Prost